Hello and welcome to the Record Rangers morning briefing. We were just trying something technical there that clearly didn't work, so we're going to give that a miss. You could probably hear the screeching in the background.
Wonderful.
That was us attempting a Twitter space at the same time as doing this. It doesn't work, folks. So anyway, we are going to move on. We've got lots to talk about today. There's not much happening in terms of overall news. It's quite quiet in the last couple of days when it comes to Rangers. So we're going to get stuck into the big question I think most people have been asking following on from the game against Motherwell, a 2-1 win, of course, but hardly a convincing performance. And that question is, what is Giovanni Van Bronckhorst's style of play at the moment? What is he trying to do with this team? What specifically did he try and do against Motherwell? And of course, I've got the tactical guru, the man, the legend that is Joshua Barry, here beside me to hopefully explain all that in a bit more detail than you would normally get. So, Josh,
yes,
there's been a lot of chat about the horseshoe, this idea that Giovanni Van Bronckhorst teams play the ball across the back from one fullback to the other in a sort of horseshoe shape, the ball going back and forward as they hold on to the ball, apropos of very little penetration. And perhaps Sunday's game was a pretty strong example of that at times, when that midfield was kind of bypassed significantly. First of all, let's just talk about specifics of that Motherwell game. What did you think that Giovanni Van Bronckhorst was actually trying to do there? Because there was a lot of people that were watching the game, people who don't have the qualifications that you have in terms of the SFA and things like that, who were looking at it and saying, I'm not sure exactly what's happening here in front of me on this pitch and what Rangers are trying to do. And I suppose that's quite disconcerting, having seen Rangers over the last few years look very, very constructed in terms of what they were doing under Steven Gerrard and Michael Beale.
We should just start, Johnny, in your stress there and trying to work out obviously the spaces. You went back into your former employee and called this the Record podcast, which of course it's not.
Right. Sorry. Yes.
Which we should just state before a barrage of notes come in. For anyone who's wondering what we were trying to do, we were trying to stream on spaces at the same time, and all of a sudden got some last minute feedback. So I thought I'd just start with that.
Thanks, Josh. That's definitely going to help quell the conspiracy theories. Yes.
Yeah, no.
Apologies. I was slightly what's the word? Flustered would be the correct way of putting it.
Yeah, no, I think it's the main conversation off the back of the weekend. Johnny, is a piece that I'm going to put that's actually free to read because it's our newsletter, and if you click on the link in the comments, you can subscribe to that newsletter for free. And it talks about the fact that Rangers are 2 points behind in the league, but the style of play, particularly away from home, I don't think it's so much of an issue at home, but the style of play away from home, both in Europe and domestically, I think is hampering the goodwill that comes with when a manager needs a little bit of time to implement what he wants to implement. I've just got in front of me, Johnny, the long pass share, for example. Rangers averaged 22% of their open play passes were high passes on when was it, Sunday, which was higher than, for example, Livingston was 8.5%, Hibs 16%, the Old Firm 12%, and Hearts 12%. So I think it was a uniquely bad game from back to front. The manager spoke about it because Rangers couldn't find a free man in midfield. But away from home and at times in Europe, I think Van Bronckhorst wants to play directly. I think it's very different from some home games where they keep a lot of the ball and have a lot of possession. But at the moment, I think they're kind of in between things because they've changed goalkeeper, which obviously impacts how they play out from the back. I think they're lacking quite a lot of the base of midfield and the options that they have next to John Lundstrom. We know there's been a lot of chopping and changing in the team regardless. I think Van Bronckhorst football does look better when he's got two wingers, and that's been an improvement since the international break. But I mean, I'll link as well our longer piece on what is his style of play. I don't think he has a philosophy. I think he has a philosophy, but I don't think his philosophy is restricted to a formation or a particular belief on this is how football has to be played. I think it has certain guiding principles that you see with every single team. I just don't think people necessarily like it that much. So one of which is that he always adapts a little bit to the opposition. Again, we can reel off hundreds of examples of that. And one of which is the way that he marks without the ball, which is man for man, which is obviously very different from the way that Beale and Gerrard did. But I don't think he has. I don't think there's as distinctive a style on the ball, apart from that control, as I say, that is distinguishable as this is what Van Bronckhorst is trying to do. So, as I say, I think this conversation is one that doesn't help a manager when they're under a little bit of pressure, because if the results aren't necessarily going your way, you should then normally have the kind of hopefully have the process to fall back upon. This is what we're trying to create, even if, you know, away from home Rangers have struggled comparatively to at home performance-wise. But then the results keep coming. But the argument is, how many games can Rangers win like the weekend against Motherwell when they create very, very little under one expected goals? How often can they take 3 points? I don't think it's, you know, I think it would be naive to not look ahead and not look at it now and say at one point that isn't going to happen and Rangers aren't going to take maximum points from a game like that.
Yeah, because I've got a comment here coming in about expected goals from the game. And I think there's obviously various expected goals models that take in various different factors. We use StatsBomb, which are the premier stats provider in the UK. I think by far the best, certainly much more reliable generally than some of the ones that you get right on the whistle. But one of the comments which I've kind of lost, there it is, from Alan Stewart, Laurie Hall. They are saying, the fact we only had 2 more shots to Motherwell and had only 1.15 XG is embarrassing and sums up our domestic away form. It wouldn't normally be embarrassing. I don't think, you know, it's a one-off game. But the fact is that the XG, according to StatsBomb, was actually 0.8, not 1.15. So that shows you just how kind of shot shy Rangers were across the whole game in front of goal. We know that the second goal was a low XG chance because headers always are. Very, very rarely do you see a header that goes above 0.2 for the simple reason that statistically headers don't go in very often. So, Josh, it's interesting from a point of view of XG. A lot of people look at it and think, oh, you know, it doesn't really tell you anything, but there is a reason why XG was introduced by gamblers and they made a significant amount of money from using it in the gambling market to game football.
Yeah, oh, definitely. And I'm just, as I speak, Johnny, I've put in an article that we did, I believe this was in the last international break, trying to answer this very question in a bit more detail. What is Van Bronckhorst's style of play? What are those kind of distinguishing factors, which I'll maybe go back to touch upon? I guess expected goals is like anything. It helps you to analyse a game because, I mean, the best example is, hypothetically, a team could have 10 shots. Those 10 shots could be from 30 yards and therefore not have a considerable or a realistic effort of ending in goal. The other team could have 2 shots. So 10-2, it looks like one team's dominated. But if those 2 shots are, you know, 1v1 opportunities or close range opportunities, obviously that changes the likelihood, the expectation of a goal. So it's all, I guess, about looking at trends over a season. At the start of last season, Rangers were top, but their underlying numbers weren't as strong. At the moment, that's the same. But it's also not gospel. It's not you know, definitive that this will happen. Teams won't always regress to the mean of what they are creating. But it is a helpful indicator that looks at what is the actual quality of chances that Rangers are creating. A good example, and something we've written about on the site as well, Johnny, is Antonio Cholak, who has scored 10 before the weekend, had scored 10 goals from 4.6 expected goals. There's 2 sides to the coin of that. One, is he going to really slow down and regress to the mean of only scoring half the goals that he scored already? Or 2, is he just a very clinical finisher playing, you know, at a quality, a level of the league, what the Scottish Premiership is, that he can finish these chances consistently? You know, he didn't have expected goals back when Chris Boyd was around, but I'm sure he'd have performed above his expected goals quite regularly because he was so good at kind of finding the corners. So it's a barometer. It's not a definitive to say this is a bad style of play. And there's also a lot of benefits to a manager who can be flexible. You know, how many times on the European run did we speak about that? And Van Bronckhorst isn't constrained, I think, to have to play football in a certain way, which means that he can go direct to points. But I think the issue is when you look at a game like Motherwell at the weekend, you're right, Rangers weren't able to get the ball into the final third. They weren't able to build play, and I think that's why they had to resort to so many long balls. And incidentally, as we've written about on the website this morning, it took Malik Tillman to take matters into his own hand and just drive the length of the pitch because they'd lacked a player able to do that. So, and it's an interesting note as well, Johnny. When was Rangers' best domestic run under Van Bronckhorst? The 6 games when he first came in, both statistically. If you look at the numbers of wins in a row, he hasn't had, I think it was 6 wins in a row since that first month and a half. And there was games within that weren't brilliant, but I think that's probably when his team had looked at their best with wide wingers and fast attacks. And that hasn't always been replicated since. I do think at home, especially with Cholak, when they've played 2 wide players, Sakalis and Murn's a great example. There's more pace injected into the attacks. They have a lot of goal threats. But if you take a game like the Dundee United game when it's 2-1, Rangers really lack goal threats. The fullbacks aren't that high. That I don't think that's a template to go and win the league title. But the personnel's chopped and changed so much. Sometimes it's hard to distinguish what is the starting 11, and therefore what is the first choice plan.
Yeah, let's dig in a little bit to what Giovanni Van Bronckhorst said after the game, because he did make some interesting comments about the tactics. He said, in the build-up in the first half, we couldn't come into the next phase because I think we were not quick or good enough in our build-up to get a free man in midfield. We were too slow in our passing and movement. Josh, what does that mean? What is he talking about there in terms of getting the ball to a free man, and what individual is he highlighting there?
Well, I think what he's saying is if you look at where it was King and Davies, the number of long passes they played. I'm just trying to get it up in front of me as we speak. The 2 players that played the highest number of passes for Rangers at the weekend were the fullbacks, and often they went long. Borna Barisic, I think, his pass percentage, he had 82 passes, which was highest in the team, and his pass percentage was something like 67, 66%. It wasn't high, so the ball turned over a lot because instead of going through the centre, and some teams will want to build out wide and get numbers out there, and Rangers, I think, higher up the pitch did want to, and that's why I had Malik Tillman stationed up high on the left in the first kind of 10 minutes. That looked quite effective. On the right-hand side, you had Scott Arfield trying to make those runs in the final thirds. For me, it was a midfield and a team selection. If you're playing at home, where that territorial dominance is a preconception, you know you're going to have the ball in the opposition half, then that's not a problem. But the difficulty is, and we spoke about this in the summer, Johnny, the difficulty is teams won't always... A team like Motherwell might have a similar objective to a team like St Mirren when they play Rangers. They know they're not going to have as much of the ball, and they know they'll have to take their moments and be clever in how they attack. But they're not all just going to sit in the box and sit in a low block, and the connotations of that is just a team that sit really deep in the pitch. That doesn't always happen. Sometimes they'll try and limit you higher up the pitch. That's happened a lot under Van Bronckhorst last season when they only played with 1 deep midfielder, and they didn't have not only the numbers but I think maybe the personnel to be clever and break pressure. And you see this all around world football, how important it is now to be able to create space not only high up in the pitch but deep in the pitch as well. It's something that Gerrard's team were quite good at because they had all those rotations at the back with the fullbacks going high. They had always had more numbers deep in the pitch, always outnumbering the opposition. So then they always have the free pass to take the ball slowly and build up the pitch. Whereas this version of Rangers, I don't think they've always had that, particularly away from home. We're going to do a piece at the weekend which looks at the numbers away from home comparatively to home. And we were speaking about this in the office yesterday, and it's quite noticeable, some of the differences of some of these statistics that look at how often Rangers are building into the final thirds, the passes inside the box, all these underlying indicators, which obviously we can take a lot from. So I think that's what Van Bronckhorst is saying is to do with the pace that Rangers build out from the back. The fact that Scott Arfield, I don't think his game is coming and building deep and taking the ball off the defenders and spinning and playing it through the lines. Mm-hmm. If you look at the pass network, and again, that's in 2 of our pieces yesterday, the analysis pieces from yesterday, you can see that the shape of the team, the middle was largely ineffective. Cholak, I think he only attempted 12 passes in the game. Arfield wasn't able to get on the ball all that much, and then you just have John Lundstram, who has a lot to do at the base of midfield. So again, I think that was a midfield that if Rangers had territorial dominance as a certainty, it would have been fine. But when you're trying to get the ball past opposition pressure, that it didn't work as well, which is why you have to resort to so many long balls.
A few good comments I want to get to in here. Graham Hanna saying, are we watching a similar version of Van Gaal's Man United? Sometimes it certainly feels like that, I've got to be honest. Simple Simon said, our wingers stay too wide though when we start attacks. I have to say, I felt that throughout the game against Motherwell, Josh. It just left Cholak so isolated because the two wide guys are chalking their boots very, very far away from him. And with the midfield not being able to get up and get alongside him quite as much as as you would hope, it left Cholak looking very, very lonely up there. Aldo 21574 saying, anyone know how close Lowry is to coming back? We need someone creative like him back in the side. Certainly think Alex Lowry should be coming back very, very soon. He's fit, he's in training, and I think he'll be introduced back into the B team. I think you talked to Dave McCallum about this recently, Josh.
I'm trying to remember if there's been so many Lowry updates. I'm trying to remember what the most recent one is. Maybe get one today at the press conference before the Dundee game. I certainly think he's a player who would help. The difficulty you have is, you're going to have normally if you're trying to break down a team. I guess most teams would have a couple of players that stretch the pitch, whether that be the fullbacks or the wingers. I think at home you've seen the benefit at times of why those wingers need to be so wide. Sakala is a great example. The difficulty is Rangers wingers aren't performing well, so I don't think you really see the benefit of it. And obviously Sakala was on the bench at the weekend. Theoretically, Tillman and Arfield, I think, should have been able to get close. And when the difference between maybe Van Bronckhorst's system and Gerrard's is that the fullbacks play a far more supporting role. Sometimes Tavernier's higher, but when he's got a winger ahead of him, he comes inside the pitch more as well. And as we had on the website this week from a friend of the show, Football Stuart, as he's known on Twitter, on the left-hand side, that isn't really Borna Barisic's game as much as he's played like a third centre-back at points. He's not a player from deep who is going to be able to play those penetrating passes and impact the game centrally. He's far more comfortable going wide, crossing the ball, being in the final third. Whereas on the other side, I think Tavernier can kind of do everything at right back. He's a far more flexible player in that regard. Yilmaz obviously hasn't been blooded into the team, but I do think that he would help with that because when Rangers look bad in possession, it can just look very stagnant. There's not enough players to be able to, like Yilmaz did for the final few minutes against St Mirren. And yes, you're coming on to a game that's already won, but you can see a player's inclinations. You can, I think, see what they're trying to do. At the base of midfield, though, next to John Lundstram, because Glenn Kamara has, we know he had an injury knock at one point, but he's also kind of fallen out of favour. Ryan Jack's now injured. You're kind of looking at who plays in that role with Tom Lawrence injured as well, especially away from home when Rangers maybe do struggle to get the numbers behind the ball to build play and go forward up the pitch. Yeah,
got a few questions here about rumours flying around about Giovanni Van Bronckhorst not having a say in recruitment. John Dooley saying, is it true that players signed are not chosen by GVB? I'll get that out. Easy for you to say. Guys, I mean, the thing on that one is the club were very clear when I spoke to Stuart Robertson about this issue. I asked him directly whether or not Giovanni Van Bronckhorst has the final say, and Stuart Robertson was adamant that he does, that it wouldn't make any sense for him not to, because then you'd have a coach that would have players that he didn't want. So certainly that's what Stuart Robertson is saying, that fundamentally it wouldn't make sense for that to be the case. And I think we have to take that at face value, because I think he's right. It wouldn't make sense. There is a structure at Rangers whereby there's a recruitment team and a sporting director, or a director of football, but sporting director at Rangers. And they will go out into the market and look at the various options that are available for the kind of positions that Giovanni Van Bronckhorst wants to be filled. And then he'll take a look at the options, and in a group discussion, they'll discuss who they want and who's the number one choice, who's the number two choice, who's number three choice. And the manager will have the final say on that. That's my understanding of how it works. Now, it comes down to, do you think that it's better to have a manager making those decisions for himself and bringing in the players he knows? That's a very, very old-fashioned system that not many top clubs work with nowadays. This is the system that most top clubs in Europe operate with. They have a sporting director who is the spider in the web of the club, the guy who's going around making sure that all aspects of the club, from the women's team to the youth academy to the recruitment, are all working correctly. And part of that is that the manager is then, or the coach is then given the opportunity to have a look at the scouting targets. And I would imagine if Giovanni van Bronckhorst, Josh, had players that he wanted in, or he felt would be good additions, they're not going to turn that down, are they? I think that would be added into the mix. I know for a fact, Steven Gerrard had 2 or 3. I'll name 3 right now that he absolutely desperately wanted to get into Ibrox, and 2 of them were big successes: John Lundstrom and Connor Goldson, and 1 was a big failure in Jack Simpson. But those were 3 players. Not, I think my understanding is that were driven by Steven Gerrard as opposed to the Rangers scouting team. So I think it's a flexible system in that regard.
Yeah, well, I can see as well people saying, well, what about the fact that Van Bronckhorst hasn't signed Dutch players? But the thing is, you're right, clubs don't, he isn't the head of recruitment, and maybe he will be able to recommend some players. We obviously don't know who's the process of each individual signing, but I think that the signing of Cholak's a good example of someone who fits the manager's style of play, is within the reach of the club financially, makes sense as a transfer. You can see, for example, that the players signed under Gerrard and the players signed under Van Bronckhorst, I think to a degree you can see their differences and between the 2 managers, and therefore there's what should be a suitability to either system. Someone like Tom Lawrence for me is an example of a number 8 that, Gerrard's midfielder next to a number 6 would have been far more Glenn Kamara, because he had the attacking impetus from the fullbacks and the number 10s, whereas Van Bronckhorst needs more from those 2 kind of wider central midfielders, of which Tom Lawrence, until he got injured, seemed to be fulfilling very well. But I think you're right. The recruitment is now so much holistic, is maybe a good way to put it. And as Robertson outlines in that interview, I think what happens is the manager, of course, will have a final say, but maybe won't be the one who's identifying players. But I'd imagine that happens a lot around at other clubs. I guess certain managers' influences will maybe be stronger at certain clubs, and whether a player is driven by a manager or not, obviously we don't know in each of these individual circumstances. But the issue that Rangers have had, and it's a bit of a separate issue, Johnny, but the areas, again, we wrote this last week, we've written a lot recently, it seems, but the issue I think Rangers have had with this window is, you look at a player like Matondo and Yilmaz, you put them together, and it's a significant outlay of the summer transfer window, when they're not contributing as much would have been hoped at this stage in October. When you've had those defeats in the Champions League, it's hard to turn around and say that whoever you put the blame at the door of, whether it be the manager, the sporting director, whether it's a good decision, I think it's hard to say that areas like the centre of midfield not being addressed properly, that's not a failure. Because again, you look at Arfield playing 3 games in a week. Scott Arfield's fantastic servant for Rangers, no criticism of him whatsoever, but Rangers got into this issue last season where there's an over dependence on certain players, and particularly at his age, in a position at the weekend that I don't think necessarily suit them that well. So the structure of the how a transfer policy works, it shouldn't just be one manager comes in and gets to pick all these players, because we've seen what happened with Pedro Caixinha when that happened, and that didn't work very well. There should be a bigger, wider club view. If those decisions have been wrong individually, then as I've just said, which I think some of them have been, then that's something that merits criticism. But I don't think it's just a case of a manager saying, "Yeah, I like that player. I'm going to go out and get him." As I said, I think the Caixinha example is why that probably isn't the best model to adopt.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to defend Pedro Caixinha. You're not going to be surprised by this and say, well, he did actually bring in some good players, and Daniel Candeias was a good player. Alfredo Morelos was a good player. Bruno Alvarez was an excellent player who didn't work out at Rangers. Fabio Cardoso is now at Porto, is a good player. who didn't work out at Rangers. It was Ryan Jack has been a good player for Rangers. It was a bit of a mixed bag under Pedro because everyone points to Dalcio, who was shocking, but was on loan, and Carlos Pena. It's the less we say about that, the better.
And Herrera.
And of course, Edward Herrera, who didn't really work out either. So, yeah, it's a bit of a mixed bag. A bit like, the recruitment this summer, to be honest. Everyone's going in two-footed on the recruitment this summer. But Čolak's been a really, really good signing. Now that Ben Davies is coming into the team, to me, Ben Davies looks like he's going to be a fantastic signing for Rangers. And Tom Lawrence, before he was injured, also looked really, really good. Listen, Malik Tillman, you've been on the train since the get-go, Josh. Choo and all that. I'm a bit more of I'm on the fence when it comes to Malik Tillman because I'm not keen on his lack of defensive application. But I certainly think he's shown that he's been capable of big things and flashes, as we saw so dramatically on Sunday. So that leaves really, in terms of the recruitment of the 7 players that are brought in, these 3 players that people are rightly looking at and questioning. And that would be the signing of John Souttar, which we knew was a gamble from the get-go because of his injury records. But, it's a long contract that he has, and it may well be he comes back from this injury and doesn't get injured again. I think we'll have to take a slightly longer view on that, but I can understand why people are frustrated with it. And then you've got Rabi Matondo, who doesn't look like the answer, let's be honest, at this stage for that starting right winger position. But it is early days and he is a young man. And finally, you've got the whole situation with Ridvan Yilmaz, where he's just not been able to usurp Borna Barisic. Borna's been playing well up until the Liverpool game, obviously. But you have to ask yourself, I think the bigger question is around this recruitment is, and we've discussed this yesterday, why such a large sum was spent on 2 players in Matondo and Yilmaz when there was other areas of the team that almost certainly needed refreshing. I think that's the way to look at the recruitment for me, because it is a balanced picture now. I think with Ben Davies having come in and done so well, and Čolak is obviously a massive hit and a brilliant signing at £1.8 million. Tom Lawrence obviously given stuff as well. The frustration is obviously around the injuries to 3 of these players. Souttar, Lawrence, Ben Davies have all suffered injuries up to this point in the season. And Josh, one thing, like from a positive point of view, people are always telling me I'm trying to be too positive, and I know there's a lot of negative comments out there. But I do think that if Rangers can get to the World Cup break in good shape, and they do have a lot of good fixtures coming up. You mentioned that Giovanni van Bronckhorst, his best run was 6 games, 6 wins in a row. Well, I think that's 4 now. You've got Dundee on the midweek tomorrow. You've got Livingston at the weekend. And I don't think the games that are coming between now and the World Cup are the most challenging set of fixtures. Certainly not as challenging as the ones that the Rangers had at the start of the season. On top of that fixture run, you hit the World Cup and all of a sudden you have a lot of good players coming back from injury. Now, whether or not these players will remain fit is another question entirely. But I'm going to throw out a wee hand grenade here. For me, as it stands, the best right midfielder at the club for Rangers is not exactly what Van Bronckhorst wants. But if we're talking about a style that Van Bronckhorst used, which is when, for example, Tielman has played on the right midfield, he's come in very much inside, close to the striker, to allow Tavernier to overlap. There's one man that's absolutely made for that position and has played that position before very well, played it to a better standard than Matondo has, than Wright has. Sakala's only played it a couple of times, but the man that I would suggest that if he could stay fit, that would be a good spot in there would be Kemar Roof. You have to be fit, and that's a big if. But if you can get him back, then to me that would be an ideal opportunity domestically to get someone who has absolutely goals in them and onto the pitch. But I mean, I get people will say, well, but will he be fit? And I totally accept that. But if you're talking about having more options and more things, more firepower, I mean, the return of Yanis Hadji and Kemar Roof, the return of Tom Lawrence, those are big factors.
Yeah. I mean, I think you've Firstly, you need to give Sakala more of an opportunity at right wing.
I agree with that totally, mate.
Yeah,
I want to be on record. I totally agree with that.
Yeah. And the game against St Mirren for me was a template that if you got a Tillman in there, and I know Tillman has faced criticism, and I put at the end of my piece today, he's played true to circumstance, which is a player who's obviously immensely talented, because you look at the fact that he was in the first team picture at Bayern Munich before he got his ACL injury, but still played 20 first team games. I guess he's a year and a half older than Leon King. I think you can have a separate conversation about whether it's wise to bring a young player into Rangers in that when they have to play a leading role at that point in their career. But no one can say that the attributes or the potential isn't there for him to have a really successful season. And it was good to see him come back in, because I think the longer that he spent out of the team could have been an Amad Diallo situation where he was kind of out of the picture for so long. Who's now, I think he's down at Sunderland, seems to be doing pretty well down there. But that struck. Kent isn't playing well consistently. I think he looks so low on confidence and far from the player that everyone knows he can be. Matondo looks more comfortable on the left, certainly. I think Van Bronckhorst's teams domestically, I don't think it's fair to say they need two wingers, but I think it helps them to have two wingers, because the Cholak goal against St Mirren is a great example. The game's a bit dead. St Mirren have had a couple of chances by that point. Sakala gets a ball by the touchline that, if it's a Roof or an Arfield or whoever, even a Tavernier, I think now at this stage in his career, they're not able to drive inside, beat two men, inject pace, outplay their opponents in the way that Sakala is, because Rangers, when they have a couple of dynamic players in there, I think it really helps with the tempo, with speeding up play, as opposed to what they can fall into, which is holding possession. That means they're in control, but I don't think it's that disruptive to the opposition. I think, for example, at home, if you could get a team when Lawrence is back with Lawrence and Tillman, we've only seen them play as two number 8s once at home against Ross County, and I thought they did well with two wide players. Then Cholak's not going to be isolated, because Tillman and Lawrence are close to him. Lundstrom can be at the base of midfield, and Tavernier can have that free role where he almost becomes a second central midfielder at points, but is also able to have freedom in the attack and third. We've seen him, I think, had 4 shots against St Mirren, because he was afforded those positions at the edge of the box. Left backs, we've obviously spoken about that a lot. Long term, what happens with that, I think, remains to be seen, because Yilmaz, there's no inclination to suggest that he will come in, because he's not up to this point. There's no indication that he is going to be phased in as first choice at this moment in time. Obviously, that could change maybe after the World Cup, Johnny. But for me, Rangers needed to address that right wing issue, right wing area. Maybe with Matondo, they thought, look, here's a player who has played that in his career and can do. It's not as if he can't do it at all. We've seen against Hearts his assist. He's not done it consistently. I'm not suggesting that for a second. But then also perhaps his favoured long-term position, the left wing. Ryan Kent still hasn't signed a new contract, so hypothetically Matondo then becomes maybe his successor on the left. But the balance of the team then maybe isn't right with a right footer on the right-hand side. But Sakala against St Mirren, I think it was the best wide performance Rangers have had at home in quite a while, against a deep defence, because it committed players, made life uncomfortable, as I say, injected pace into the attack. So I'd like to see him given a few more opportunities. And to go back to that point of Van Bronckhorst's 6 games, his best domestic run, which was 6 wins in a row. Sometimes he played with Hadji out there, but he always played with 2 wide players stretching the pitch constantly and allowing Tavernier points to come inside the pitch as well. And that's just my preference for watching his style of football in the league. I think it is conducive to quickening it up and improving the tempo.
Okay, folks, we're going to call it a day there. If you're watching and you haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe button on YouTube. Please, that means you will get a notification every time we go live. We don't just do morning briefings at 9:30. Of course, we do them whenever there's big breaking news. We sometimes do them in the evening, and certainly when there's Champions League games or just European games in general, we will always do them at 6 p.m. from the city that we're in, because the guys are obviously away with the team to watch them as well. So there's plenty of action on the Rangers Review YouTube channel. So please hit that subscribe button. It's absolutely free. And also, if you want to support what we do, if you like the morning briefing, If you like the tactical analysis we do and want to read more of it, you can do that on www.rangersreview.co.uk/subscribe. It's £1 at the moment for the first 2 months, and then £2.99 after that, given that a paper is so expensive nowadays, like £2.50 or whatever. £2.99 for 1 month ain't bad at all. I want to give a shout out to the Trying Scotsman there, who chucked £2 our way via super sticker from YouTube. So thank you very much for your support. Every penny helps when it comes to keeping us around at the Rangers Review, keeping us a big part of the conversation. And we are just so happy that so many of you are helping support us do what we do. There's nothing better than covering Rangers, even though at the moment it's quite challenging. Let's not lie, it's not quite the same funny, happy place that it was last season. But there's still tons to talk about and tons to get our teeth into, and plenty of hope that things can get back to a bit more of a normality that we saw last term. So listen, thanks you all for watching. Thank you all for your support, and we will see you again tomorrow morning when myself and Joshua will be back